The breaking of the Fellowship and the finale of the first movie in the Lord of the Rings film trilogy might be one of the most emotionally poignant and intense moments in the whole movie. Seeing Aragorn let Frodo go, take on a horde of Uruk-hai, and then defend Boromir's body in probably the most epic 1v1 we see of Aragorn in the entire series is a culmination of what the entire movie has been building towards. So it's too bad that none of it actually happened. That's right, Peter Jackson completely made up these critical moments of the final scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, which made me wonder, what did Tolkien say actually happened during this climactic moment of the first part of his series? And were Peter Jackson's changes an improvement or a mistake? My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 18 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Lord of the Rings edition. This is the show where I take your favorite fantasy franchise and compare the adaptation to the original, and point out every single difference scene by scene. Guys, today we have one of the most monumental episodes because this is the finale of part 1 of the trilogy. That's right, we have finally made it to the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, which had a lot more changes than I was expecting, which is why today might be a bit longer of an episode. I almost split this into 2 videos, but then I was like, hey, it's the finale, so why not just do a big episode to finish off the first movie? Before we jump into the changes, I wanted to give a shout out to this commenter from last episode. Each week, I'll be showcasing one of my favorite comments from a previous episode, which could be a fun fact, a correction, or just anything that I think is worth showing. So once you finish the video, comment your thoughts below to potentially get featured in the next episode. As always, I'll cover every change across 4 categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. Of course, before we get to all the changes, we need to refresh our memory on what happens in the final sequence of the movie. Stick with me because there's quite a bit to cover, but trust me, it's worth it. Alright, so picking up from last week when the Fellowship makes it to the end of the Anduin River, they make camp on the western shore. We cut to a short time later and Aragorn says that they will set out to the east side of the river at nightfall and then approach Mordor from the north. And Gimli voices how impossible the next steps of their journey are. Legolas then tells Aragorn that they should leave as a shadow and a threat has been growing in his mind. And at that moment, Merry shows back up at camp with some firewood and after looking around, asks where Frodo is. We then cut to Frodo wandering about in the woods and Boromir shows up next to him collecting firewood. We then have the iconic scene of Boromir trying to take the ring from Frodo and Frodo running away. Frodo runs to the top of Amon Hen with the ring on and sees Barad-dûr and the Eye of Sauron before falling off the platform and taking the ring off of his finger. At this moment, Aragorn approaches him and Frodo is worried that he might take the ring as well, but after they talk and have a nice moment together, Aragorn sees Sting is glowing and sends Frodo running off. Aragorn then turns around and begins his epic fight sequence against the Uruk-hai. Legolas and Gimli join him soon after and we see Frodo running through the woods and encountering Merry and Pippin, who realize that Frodo is leaving alone. They distract the Uruk-hai so that Frodo can escape, and before they get chopped to bits, Boromir runs in to save the day in his final stand. We then see a compilation of action shots as the Fellowship is in full battle mode at this point. Boromir blows his horn and tells Merry and Pippin to run, but of course they just stand there and watch as Boromir slays as many Uruk-hai as he can before getting pierced by 3 arrows and finally falling in battle. Merry and Pippin then get picked up by the Uruk-hai and taken off, as Lurtz, the enemy commander, lines up his final shot to kill Boromir. Before he can fire the shot though, Aragorn jumps into frame and tackles him to the ground. We then witness Aragorn's most epic 1v1 of the entire trilogy as he takes on this massive chieftain of Saruman, and then after winning the fight he runs over to Boromir and they share their final words with each other. Since the Uruk-hai have captured the 2 hobbits, they run off as they have seemingly accomplished what they set out to do, and as quickly as it started, the battle is finished. We then cut to Frodo standing on the shoreline of the river holding the ring, and finally he sets out in a boat to cross by himself and continue the journey. Sam is running quickly through the woods behind him, shouting Frodo's name, but he reaches the water just slightly too late as Frodo is already partway across the river. He then begins to walk into the water as Frodo shouts for him to stay back as he knows that Sam can't swim. But Sam, of course, continues after him and eventually begins drowning in the water. Thankfully, a hand reaches down to save him as Frodo lifts him out of the water and into the boat. They then set out to the other side of the river together and we cut to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli watching from across the river as the hobbits reach the eastern side. They have just set Boromir over the edge of the falls in his funeral boat and Legolas goes towards the boat to follow Sam and Frodo. But Aragorn says that Frodo and Sam are on their own now. The job of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli is now to save Merry and Pippin from their fate with the Uruk-hai. Lastly, we cut to the final shot of the entire film, which shows Frodo and Sam atop a cliff staring out over the eastern lands of Middle-earth and peering at Mordor in the distance. And that is where our movie comes to a close as now the broken Fellowship sets out on their own new journeys. Now before I get into all of the changes, I need to mention that this week is a bit of a weird one because technically Tolkien Tolkien leaves things on a bit of a cliffhanger in his version of the final scene. The movie shows us Boromir's death, funeral send-off, and then the departure of both sides of the Fellowship, Sam and Frodo, and then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. But in the book, Tolkien only writes about Sam going after Frodo and then them crossing the river together, and we are left on a complete cliffhanger as to what happened to the rest of the Fellowship. Personally, I think the way Peter Jackson structured this made a lot more sense in a film format, because otherwise you would have been left completely in the unknown. Not that movie cliffhangers are bad, but after a 3.5-hour movie, you kind of want some closure. So showing Boromir's send-off and the paths of the Fellowship on their new quests was a smart move to set people up mentally for what the next movie would entail. But that being said, I'm going to be pulling information for the changes from the last chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring and the first chapter of the Two Towers, as that is where we finally hear about what happened after Sam and Frodo left in regards to the battle at Amon-Hen. So let's start things off with our first 3 categories of character, timeline, and location changes. First, for characters, there's only one major difference, and that is that Lurtz, the Uruk-hai commander, is completely made up. He appears nowhere in the book, and you'll see why once we get to the plot changes. But for now, just know that the real character in the books is an Uruk-hai named Ugluk, and he appears later in the story, so he won't be able to die for plot reasons. Therefore, they create Lurtz as a dispensable character just for the movie. Next, for the timeline changes, there are 2. First, the movie skips over their night camping at Parthgallen, which is the shoreline they come to at the end of the river near Amon-Hen. In the book, they stay there for the night, and then the Battle of Amon-Hen happens the next day. Second, the last shot of the movie, showing Sam and Frodo on the rocky hills/mountains, would have technically been a couple days after the breaking of the Fellowship. Not a big alteration, and one could argue that this shot was a couple days after, but you know the deal, I gotta mention everything I notice. Lastly, in regard to location differences, we just have a bit of a change as far as distance goes. Peter Jackson sort of compacts the area of these events, whereas the book is way more spread out. They camp at Parthgallen, Aragorn is at Amon-Hen when Boromir dies a mile from Aragorn, and they set Boromir's funeral boat over the falls a mile from Parthgallen. The movie just shows all of this happening right near where they camped, but in the book, these dots on the map are like all a mile from each other. Alright, so now we are to the all-important section of plot changes. Strap in because this is a bit of a longer one today. As always, I can't get into specific dialogue between characters because that would take me hours to go through, but if you're wanting to know specifically what was said during these parts that were left out of the film, don't worry, you still have a chance to catch these details. Check out my link in the description to get your free trial of Audible, which comes with a free audiobook of your choice. You can either claim the Fellowship of the Ring and start from the beginning of my series and follow along chapter by chapter, or since we're at the end of this movie, you can get ahead of the game and claim the Two Towers to prepare for next week's kickoff of the next movie. Either way, you can get a free audiobook and support the channel at the same time. Alright, let's get into the changes. To start off, and I already touched on this briefly in the timeline changes, all of the events of the breaking of the Fellowship occur right after they come to shore at Parthgallen in the movie. However, in the book, they camp for a night, and it isn't until the next day that all of these events happen. Some of what we missed that night before is a brief interaction between Frodo and Aragorn that foreshadows the next day's attack. While it is Frodo's turn to take watch for the night, Aragorn is uneasy and stirs in his sleep. He wakes up and goes to Frodo and asks him to draw his sword. They both see that it is faintly glowing, which means that orcs are in the distance. They both hope that orcs are on the eastern side of the shore and not on their side, but as we know, the enemy is approaching. Next, a couple of smaller changes are that Gimli does not say his lines about their perilous journey, and Legolas does not warn Aragorn about his feeling of growing darkness. The next change is that the movie removes a moment of the Fellowship discussing how to proceed, and it explains why Frodo leaves the company. In the movie, Merry simply notices that Frodo is gone, and we aren't really given an explanation as to why he would have just wandered away. What really happens is that the morning after they make it to Parthgallen, Aragorn asks the member of the Fellowship how they would like to proceed. He lists out multiple options, which include going west with Boromir to Minas Tirith, going east towards Mordor, or breaking the Fellowship and each going their own way. Ultimately, Aragorn appoints Frodo to make the decision. Frodo says that he needs an hour or so to be alone, and then he leaves them. Sam notices that Boromir is the only one who watches Frodo leave, and another small change is how indecisive Aragorn is in the book. In the movie, he's just like, boom, this is what we're doing, no questions. But in the book, he almost doesn't want to make the decision himself, as he is still torn between going to Minas Tirith and claiming the throne, or going with Frodo as he has pledged his loyalty to him. Plus, Aragorn knows that the best move is to go straight to Mordor and not take the ring to Minas Tirith. This is not an issue in the movie, because in the movie, Aragorn does not really want to become king and fulfill his destiny. But in the book, he does, so he's very torn on which way to go. The next change is in regard to Boromir and Frodo's conversation in the woods. Simply put, there is a lot more dialogue between Frodo and Boromir than what is shown in the movie, and a lot of it was used in the Council of Elrond. I can't dive into everything they say, but here are a few key highlights. 1. Frodo isn't rude, but he does voice his concern about the strength of men, which is partially what sets Boromir off. Number 2 is that Boromir says in this conversation, "Is it not a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt for so small a thing?" This line is moved to the Council of Elrond for the movie. Number 3 is that Boromir requests to see the ring as he only saw it once in the House of Elrond. Frodo refuses, and Boromir says, "I care not." This line is moved to the moment when he picks up the ring on the snowy mountainside, which was fabricated for the film and isn't in the book. Lastly, at number 4 is that Frodo says that nobody can wield it, which is a line given to Aragorn earlier in the film, and Boromir then says that it is a gift, and some other things that are pretty much word for word moved to the Council of Elrond in the film. So although this moment is condensed for the movie, they did take a lot of this dialogue and repurpose it throughout the film. The next change is that after Frodo escapes Boromir, his vision while wearing the ring is a lot different. In the book, after running from Boromir, Frodo goes up to sit on the high seat of Amon Hen, which is called the Seat of Seeing. While he is looking out over the land, he sees many things, like orcs crawling over the misty mountains, smoke on the border of Lorien, fire in the land of the Beornings, and more. He then takes the ring off and decides that he must go on alone. After deciding to go alone, he slips back on the ring to make his escape and heads back down to the river. Meanwhile, back at camp, we have our next change. As previously mentioned, Merry doesn't notice that Frodo is gone because they were all aware why he had left to have some time alone. Instead, this is what really happens. While Frodo is gone, they all talk amongst themselves and eventually discuss what they would each do. Gimli and Legolas say that they wish to go to Minas Tirith, but if Frodo decided to go east, then they would accompany him as it would be faithless to abandon him now. Aragorn agrees, but says that they would not all need to go with him. He says that if it was his choice, he would have Sam, Gimli, and himself accompany Frodo east and have Merry, Pippin, and Legolas go with Boromir to Minas Tirith. Merry and Pippin then speak up and say that they won't leave Frodo, but would try to convince him to not go to Mordor, as they are pretty scared. They say that that is probably what is taking him so long to decide. Then Sam speaks up and tells them that they don't know his master at all, as Frodo has already made up his mind. He then says that it would be of no use to go to Minas Tirith, then turns to Boromir to say, "Begging your pardon, Master Boromir." But to their surprise, when Sam turns to him, they all find that Boromir is nowhere to be found. Soon after this, Boromir reappears from the trees and they all notice that he just doesn't look right. He then tells them that Frodo slipped on the ring and disappeared, and Sam says that Frodo wouldn't have done that without a reason and insinuates that Boromir must have done something to him, and Aragorn is also of the same mind. They then all go running after Frodo. A small change about Frodo's escape is that he never encounters Merry and Pippin in the woods as he's running away. Since he had put on the ring to become invisible during his escape, nobody actually sees him leaving. Next, another encounter that doesn't happen is Aragorn and Frodo. They never actually speak to each other before Frodo leaves. Therefore, Frodo never offers him the ring or asks Aragorn if he can protect Frodo from himself. In the book, Aragorn tracks Frodo's steps up to the high seat of Amon Hen, but also sees that Frodo ran back down again. He knows that he should go after Frodo, but he has the urge to sit on the high seat to see what he can. He runs up to the seat and sits down, but the world is dark. As he is about to leave the seat, he sees a great bird like an eagle in the distance, descending to the earth in high circles. This then plays into our next change, which is one of the craziest additions to the film and one that I actually have no issues with. You see, in the book, Aragorn doesn't fight a single orc or Uruk-hai during this entire sequence. What happens is that while he is leaving the seat of Amon Hen, he hears the cry of orcs and then the horn of Gondor, and he runs after the noise. After a couple horn blows, it suddenly cuts off and Aragorn runs into the forest towards the noise without encountering a single orc. About a mile away, he finds Boromir leaned up against a tree, pierced by many arrows. This also means that not only is Aragorn's first fight with a bunch of Uruk-hai an addition for the film, but the 1v1 defending Boromir's body is also a film special. As we discussed in the character section, Arts was added to the film specifically for this moment, as he was dispensable and had no other role in the book since he didn't exist in Tolkien's writings. I do have to say though that this 1v1 is one of the coolest fights, and I have no issue with Peter Jackson adding it to the film. The next change is when Boromir and Aragorn share their final words with each other, and it's a lot less emotional than in the book. As you might remember from one of my previous episodes, I had hinted at the fact that Book Boromir seems to regress and become more and more corrupted each chapter, whereas in the movie he almost starts corrupted and then has a final stand that is pretty noble. I am taking nothing away from Boromir's final stand in the book, but the main change is the dialogue between these two characters. In the movie, Boromir says that he would have followed Aragorn and calls him my captain and my king. Yeah, that never happens in the book. Boromir's last words are actually quite brief, and this causes some complications later on. He says that the halflings are still alive, as he saw them get bound, not killed. Then he says that he failed and asks Aragorn to go to Minas Tirith and protect his people. Aragorn then asks him if Frodo was one of the halflings who got caught, but Boromir has already died. This causes quite a bit of worry for Aragorn, because at this moment he is unsure where he should go. He doesn't know if Frodo was captured by the orcs or if he escaped and went east, and this segues perfectly into the next change, which again goes back to the indecisive versus confident Aragorn. This time it isn't so much indecision as it is a lack of information that causes an issue. The main change is that the movie doesn't show Aragorn quite upset with himself, or their difficult decision after the orc attack. Aragorn is so upset with himself that he even says at one point that everything he's done today has gone amiss. He is angry that he delayed on the Seat of Aman-Hen, and during that time Boromir fell alone in battle. He is angry that he didn't ask Boromir about Frodo first, but waited too late and Boromir died. So now they're at an impasse, as Aragorn essentially says that Frodo is the priority and they should go after him first. But they don't know if he went bound with the orcs or if he escaped. They also have to figure out how to take care of Boromir's body, as Legolas and Gimli say they don't have time to properly bury him or create a mound over him. That's when they decide to send Boromir over the falls in a boat, along with the spoils of all of his foes that he downed in battle. This is when they get a little bit of extra information, which is excluded from the film. While they're searching through the scattered weapons and items on the ground, Aragorn finds Merry and Pippin's daggers, and this helps them figure out that Frodo must not have been captured, but only Merry and Pippin. By the way, a small change in there is the fact that Boromir is sent over with not only himself, but all of the spoils of his enemies. Another change is that this is the first time Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli are finding out about the Uruk-hai, as among the dead they see many different creatures. Regular orcs, orcs from the Misty Mountains, and orcs that look nothing like the others and have different armor and weaponry. They also bear an S rune, which Gimli says must stand for Sauron, but Legolas and Aragorn say that it can't mean that, as Sauron doesn't use white, use Elvish runes, or permit his followers to use his name. Aragorn guesses that the rune relates to Saruman, which we know is the correct answer. For some side context, but not really a change per se, is that Legolas and Gimli go to retrieve some boats while Aragorn stays with Boromir's body on the shore. When they return to him with the boats, they tell him that a boat is missing. This helps fill in some gaps and helps Aragorn feel more confident in the fact that Frodo must have escaped. Next, they set loose Boromir's funeral boat while they are also in boats in the water. Also, they're about a mile from their camping spot, whereas in the movie, their camp is right next to everything. Interesting fact that many of you have pointed out in the comments is that Galadriel gifted belts to Merry, Pippin, and Boromir. However, while Merry and Pippin got silver belts, Boromir received a gold one, and traditionally a gold belt was representative of a funeral garment belt. So Galadriel essentially predicted his death when she gifted that specifically to him. Next, after taking care of Boromir's body and returning to Parthgalen where they camped, Aragorn figures out what must have happened to the hobbits and they make their final decision. You see, when they return to their camp, Aragorn puts his tracking skills to use and sees some footprints of a hobbit going into the water and then back again, which we know was Sam almost drowning. They also spot that 2 packs are missing, including one of the larger ones, which was Sam's. After gathering this information, Aragorn concludes that Sam and Frodo escaped to the east together with the missing boat, and only Merry and Pippin were taken by orcs. Gimli and Legolas try to figure out why Frodo would have left without them, and Aragorn says that he probably didn't want to lead any other friend to death in Mordor. But the other 2 members of the Fellowship are still confused at what caused him to run, as Legolas says maybe some orcs came upon him, which caused him to use the ring to escape. Aragorn of course knows what really happened, as one of Boromir's final words to Aragorn was his admission of trying to take the ring from Frodo, but Aragorn keeps this a secret out of respect for Boromir. Now that we have covered many of the changes that relate to the other members of the Fellowship, let's rewind and see what happened with Sam and Frodo and address those changes about their escape. First, when we hear Frodo saying, "I wish I had not lived to see such times," that is actually pulled from chapter 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring book, when Gandalf and Frodo are in the Shire talking about the ring. I guess we're meant to believe that this is Frodo thinking about the conversation and having a flashback, although they never actually have this scene in the beginning of the movie. Also, a massive change you probably picked up on because I've mentioned it quite a few times already is the fact that Frodo used the ring to escape in secret. However, Sam being Sam, of course figured out his master's plan and finds him even when he's invisible. After they learn that Frodo used the ring and left Boromir, they all run off in an unorganized panic to search for him, and Aragorn goes to the seat of Amon-Hen, and Sam can't keep up with him. Sam then pauses and tries to use his head to figure out the puzzle, as he says that his legs are too short to run around to find Frodo. He then puts together the puzzle pieces that Frodo made up his mind to leave and was going to sneak off to the east side of the river. At this, he runs back down to the boats and sees a boat sliding into the water all by itself, and he rightly guesses that it is Frodo, invisible, pushing the boat into the water. The next change is that after Sam gets saved by Frodo, they go back to grab their supplies. Another small change that happens in the boat is Sam's line about his promise to Gandalf. In the books, Sam never makes a promise to Gandalf, but actually tells the elves near the Shire that he won't leave Frodo. Specifically, he makes this statement to the elf Gildor. Lastly, the final change is that Sam and Frodo cross the river before the others even start fighting the Uruk-hai. In the movie, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli see Frodo and Sam make it to the other side, but they would have already been long gone by that point. And on that note, we have officially completed the Fellowship of the Ring. You guys have no idea how much it means to me that you all have watched this series each week. When I started, it was more of a passion project that I would have been content with just getting a few hundred views on. But now we have thousands of people who tune in each week to join this adventure through Tolkien and Peter Jackson's amazing work. It is a privilege and an honor, and I look forward to finishing out the series with the next 2 movies. But for now, all I have to say is, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.